Good evening, everyone. We are from Group 4 and we are going to be presenting on Vietnam. So the question given to us is to determine the relevant international trade theories that affects Vietnam's trade policies and business strategy. To summarize, we can say that Vietnam is a socialism-oriented country. However, from economic standpoint, they actually have adopted capitalist principles. So that makes them the world's 46th largest economy in the world. And it is interesting to note that Vietnam is one of the largest beneficiaries from the US and China trade war. And then we can also see that in terms of technology, Vietnam is now the eighth largest provider of IT services in the world. However, as many companies are shifting manufacturing towards Vietnam, there is a fierce battle for skilled labor, which has worsened with the existing shortage of skilled labor. We also can see that more and more foreign companies are permitted to operate in Vietnam and are encouraged by the government to invest through direct or indirect investment. So in fact, the company law has become quite easier noticeably in recent years as now international investors can now swiftly create limited liability companies in Vietnam.
So when we want to talk about Vietnam economic strategies, first we need to look into their key trade commodities as well as their economic strategies, right? So Vietnam in 2021 actually recorded an export trade of 336 billion US dollar, and the trade surplus is actually 4.1 billion US dollar. Their key trade partners are actually from the biggest economic powerhouses, including United States, China, and Japan. They have been doing so well in their trade activities, mainly because of the economic strategies that focuses on socialist-oriented market economy. So let's look at what socialist-oriented market economy is. So first, Vietnam is actively pursuing free trade agreements that includes bilateral and multilateral. Second, they make it easy for any countries to make businesses with them by fostering investments through reducing red tapes, increased transparency, and also ratification of the procedures with regards to the national or regional level. Third, they adopt predictable and favorable duties and tax policies so that people know what's going on and there's no hidden information for any investors out there. And finally, they also ratify a lot of standards and harmonize them according to regional and global standards.
I would like to provide an overview of international trade law theory. International trade law theory could be classified into country-based or firm-based theory. Let's look at country-based theory, which is our scope boundary today. Mercantilism focuses on maintaining a trade surplus. Absolute advantage focuses on the ability to produce and output using the fewer inputs. Comparative advantage focuses specifically on opportunity cost production. Hedge theory not only focuses on factor price but also factor endowment. In the firm-based theory, country similarity suggests that should focus domestic first, then only export to the country with similar development level. Product life cycle suggests that the production of the new product would take place entirely in the home country of its innovation. Global strategy rivalry focuses on MNC and effort to gain a competitive advantage against the other global firm. Porter national competitive advantage emphasizes the competitive advantage that enable it to do better than its competitor.
Okay, so let's now take a look at the first theory, which is mercantilism. As previously mentioned by Crystal, mercantilism focuses on gaining more trade surplus by exporting goods to other countries and try to reduce trade deficit by reducing the imports into the country. So during Donald Trump's administration, to achieve the mercantilism, they imposed a higher tariff on Chinese imports, especially, and also China reacted back by imposing a higher tariff to the USA. So when they impose a higher import tariff to a certain country, so there will be less goods imported into the country. So when the trade war occurred, both parties, they have to find a new trading partners, which in this case is Vietnam. So The positive impact that we can see from the trade war for countries like Vietnam is that they have been presented with opportunity to increase their export to US and also China. Uh, Goods which were previously processed in China are now being exported from Vietnam to the USA. Another positive impact that we can see is also an increase in foreign direct investment, in which companies in certain sectors are diversifying from Chinese markets to Vietnam. Of course, when there's a relocation of companies to Vietnam, it creates more job prospect in Vietnam. However, the trade war also gives negative impact on Vietnam, especially when China boosts its export to Vietnam. This will result in an increase in Vietnam's trade deficit with China, and also it will cause more competition from Chinese goods for Vietnam's domestic enterprise. Um, Also, another concern is that Vietnam may be turned into China's backyard, which may result in adverse consequences. Um, as Chinese ministers may seek to move out obsolete technologies from their countries to reduce pollution, so it will be difficult for Vietnam to avoid from receiving these outdated technologies into their country. Furthermore, by being seen as China's backyard, Vietnam also runs a risk of being subject to more punitive measures from the US in the future.
Another country-based trade theory is the absolute advantage from Adam Smith. Countries should specialize in producing goods they have an absolute advantage and then trade them for those other countries produce, so countries could increase their efficiency. For example, Vietnam specializes in producing textiles and USA specializes in making cars. To improve the welfare for both countries, Vietnam should concentrate on producing textiles and USA should focus on making cars. Looking at the table on the left, before the trade, the total hours to make cars and garments was 60 for Vietnam and 45 hours for USA. After the trade, both countries could increase efficiency by Vietnam concentrating on the production of textiles and USA focusing on making cars. Now, the total hours are 40 for Vietnam and 20 for USA. Today, China, Thailand, and Vietnam are similar in producing low unit labor cost manufactured goods. But Vietnam has an absolute advantage as their labor cost per hour are half China's on average. This contributes to Vietnam's increasing position as a more cost-effective alternative to its regional counterparts. Looking at Vietnam's manufacturing industry, textiles consistently rank among Vietnam's leading export industries. They produce over 6,000 textile and garments manufacturing companies and surpass Bangladesh as the world's second largest exporter of ready-made garments in 2020. In contrast, China remained the largest exporter, but decreased by 7%.
Vietnam footwear export ranked second in the world after China, exporting 1 billion pairs of footwear to countries around the world every year. USA is the Vietnam's largest export market for footwear. Vietnam footwear industry could benefit as manufacturers leave China in search of lower labor costs and greater access to international market. For example, Nike and Adidas have chosen to their main manufacturing facility in Vietnam. Let's discuss why footwear is one of the top 5 export commodities in Vietnam but no others like pharmaceutical using the comparative advantage theory. Comparative advantage stipulates that a country should specialize in a certain of product for export but import the rest even if the country holds an absolute advantage in all products. RCA index is used as a reference in our study today. If the RCA index is greater than 1, it indicates comparative advantage. The higher a country RCA value of the product, the greater the export intensity of that product. It can be seen from the table that RCA value of Vietnam in footwear industry and USA in the pharmaceutical industry are both greater than 1, which show that they have reviewed the comparative advantage of the particular industry. Both countries will benefit if Vietnam specializes in footwear and USA specializes in pharmaceutical. Vietnam will benefit more from trade based on the comparative advantage, which tend to benefit small countries more than large countries. Given the comparative advantage theory we discussed, it said that Vietnam encouraged full export, which can be seen from the trade policy Vietnam practiced.
Now let's move on to the Hexer Orlin, or what I would call as HO theory. So HO theory is actually based or used to evaluate export patterns of a country relative to their natural resources at their disposal. So countries majorly export items that they can produce at abundance or resources that they can utilize immediately given their natural land, labor or capital endowments. So in other words, this theory actually explains that a country would trade something that they are specialized on or very good at producing, and then imports or exchange that with products from another country that they are not good at or less suited or not capable of manufacturing. So let's look at apparel and garment and the automotive industry between Vietnam and Korea. So Vietnam has a lot of cheap labor. So it is known to have cheap labor. It can domestically grow materials required for apparel and garments such as cotton and silk. So Vietnam silk is very popular. And the garment industry itself does not require a skilled labor forces, right? So that's why Vietnam is very good at making apparels and garments, because that is the industry they're specialized on. On the other hand, South Korea is also globally recognized automotive makers. So it has a lot of cool high-tech industries or factories to manufacture these vehicles and also assemble high-tech vehicles, including electric vehicles. It has the required skilled human capital resources, and most importantly, it has the money through local and foreign investments to actually do so. So to conclude, a country such as Vietnam will then export apparel and garments that are intensive in its relative abundant factor in Vietnam, and then will import goods, in this case automotive vehicles or automotive products, that are intensive in its relatively scarce factor. So Vietnam actually exports something that they are good at manufacturing, and know something that they are not good at, they will just continue to import. So in this case, HO theory clearly explains the situation between apparel and garment industry versus automotive industry in Vietnam.
So, those international trade theories that Anhua, Crystal, Africa, and I mentioned impacted Vietnam's business strategy and policy. With Vietnam's current free trade agreements, they are more open to international trade and investments. With that said, they have established a strategic business network with Europe and Western countries and have access to zero duty for more than 50% of the global market. For example, they signed a free trade agreement, EVFTA, with the European Union that benefits them by entitling 100% of import duties for a footwear industry will be eliminated after 7 years from entry into force, compared to today's 65% of import duty. CPTPP benefits Vietnam by enjoying duty-free access for trade in goods between Canada and Vietnam, eliminating tariffs for Canada in some export areas, and boosting their footwear export to Canadian and Mexican markets. The trend shows that the global manufacturers and investors are pivoting toward Vietnam as more economically convenient than China. In conclusion, knowing the different trade theories and trade flows between nations is important. It hopes that free trade between nations will erase the country's economic welfare. We believe Vietnam practices absolute advantage, comparative advantage, and HO theories to switch the business strategies and trade policies. But it doesn't mean that other theories do not apply to Vietnam, as they keep evolving from time to time. That's all from our group presentation. Thank you and come on.